I can ask my wife, are you going to make dinner for us tonight? And she'll say, well, what would you like to eat? And I have my choice. We just open up the freezer and pull out a hamburger or a chicken. Meat's just there. But in those days, it was very rare that most people had any meat at all. Those who enjoyed meat are usually ones who were very wealthy. So for them to take an ox or a lamb to the sacrifice, the point is simply this. It was based on their financial status. In order for a person to come before God, they had to bring something of value on the part of their status, and it had to be a sacrifice. I promise you, today, nobody came here with a sacrifice to worship God. So the value of the sacrifice, not in accordance with the sin, but it had to be perfect. And it was a sacrifice it had to cost. In our overfed society, maybe I shouldn't put it like that. I should say people like me who have more than enough to eat cannot realize what a sacrifice it meant for these people to bring an unblemished lamb in perfect health and watch it go up in smoke. Seemingly, some would say, wasted. But we'll see that it wasn't. Now, the worshiper then takes his animal and makes his way to the temple. Depending on what kind of festival it might be or what day it is, there might be lots of people going the same direction, or maybe this is a special occasion and he's on his own. Almost always take the family, because this lamb is not just about one person. This lamb has an effect on the whole family. Kids probably don't understand what little Lammy is doing tied to a rope on his way to the temple. Kids don't understand that Daddy's going to take little Lammy and slice the throat. They've been playing with that thing. It's just been like a friend in the house. It's been a pet, and now he's going to sacrifice it to God. Dad has an opportunity to explain this to his children. Children, here's what's going to happen. And he takes it, and they wait in line with this lamb until it's their turn at the entrance then to the tent of meeting. And there's only one gate into it. There's no back gate, side gate, only one gate into the worship place. They had to wait there. When it was their turn, there would be a priest or several priests, depending on how many worshipers there are, who would examine the sacrifice to see that it was acceptable. Next Sunday, I'm going to stand at the front door to make sure no. See, and there'd be a lot of people would say, hey, not me. And I'm sure that in those days there may have been some too. But this is the way that God said. You can't come to me without this perfect sacrifice. And so the priest does his responsibility in making sure the sacrifice is acceptable to God. They go in, and on the north side, which as they come into the temple area, it would be on the right-hand side, would be the north. They wait there, and there are places where they can tie their animal up and wait for their turn. When it's their turn, then the worshiper takes his animal and slices the throat. The word that is used for killing the animal, it's a very specific word in the Hebrew. And it has to do with killing it, and the vein is severed. And the priest then carries a basin or a bowl and collects the blood, while the worshiper holds the animal. So we're holding the animal, slicing the throat, holding it there until the blood is drained. The priest then takes the blood. When the priest is taking the blood to get ready to splash it on the altar, then the worshiper, that's us, we skin the animal. So that would be a skill set that we might need to learn. We skin the animal, set the skin aside, and then the animal needs to be cut up. We do that, the worshiper does. Typically at the major joints, so that it can be the animal can be placed on the altar. Then it needs to be gutted, the entrails taken out, and it also makes specific reference to the fat and the liver and the kidneys. So then the worshiper takes the legs and the entrails and washes them at the laver of washing. Before then, he presents this to the priest. Why the washing? You have to remember, throughout this whole sequence that's taking place, there is a separation between common and holy. The priest has been ordained. He's holy. God is giving them these rituals because in chapters 8, 9, and 10, the priests are going to be ordained. They're ordained, set apart, they're holy. It takes a holy priest then to take an offering from the common, to place it on there, to make it holy, to be acceptable to God. It's very important. There should be no contamination. So the worshiper, that's us. We fillet it. We clean it, wash the legs and the entrails. It's all given to the priest. The priest then takes it to the altar. The priest is the only one who touches the blood. The worshiper never touches the blood. The priest takes the pan of blood and he splashes it on the sides of the altar. After having splashed it on the sides of the altar, then the worshiper gives them the animal. The animal is placed on the fire and it's burned. And typically, in this, we hear no... It's all done in silence pretty much, but it wasn't done in silence. At different places during this ritual, there would be a psalm that would be lifted up. For example, if they were coming for a sin offering, they might be singing or reciting Psalm 51, "Create in me a clean heart, O God." Or if it was a thanksgiving, they might be reciting Psalm 40. The priest would also have a recitation. The worshiper would have to come to the priest and say, "Here's why I'm offering this burnt offering." And the priest then would be able to, having gone through the ceremony and made sure that the sacrifice was accepted, would be able to assure the worshiper, yes, it's been accepted. And then, after it's all done, you go on back to your family who are outside waiting, and it's finished. It's finished. So, it's so nice to live in the New Testament times, loving the air conditioning even more. We were talking the other day about this idea of worship. It's very quiet in here, isn't it? If you were to go to worship on that day, you would hear the bleating of the animals, the lowing of the cattle. You would also hear those last sounds of death and dying. It would be all around there as the animals. Then you'd have all the Chinese word is 热闹, 好热闹. What is it? Come on, translate. Commotion. Okay, the commotion. There'd be this commotion that's going on, this activity that's going on there, and it's all the time this activity going on with the one sacrifice after another. And so, our idea of worship is we come to sit quietly. We like to have it all sedate. But when you look at the Old Testament, it wasn't that way at all. There was just a lot going on all the time, besides being in this environment of death and fire and flame. But there's some things I'd like for us to see about this with regarding the significance of this sacrifice. And one of those things is the smoke. Smoke. On 3 different occasions in chapter 1, it says in the last part of verse 9, as a burnt offering, a food offering with a pleasing aroma to the Lord. And then after he goes on to speak about the sacrifice from the flock, and in verse 13, again, a pleasing aroma to the Lord, and in the last of the chapter, 3 times. What is it about the smoke? You'll notice that there's something special about the smoke throughout the sacrifices. In fact, is when God met with his people on the Mount Sinai, what was obvious to the people? But it was the smoke that was there. It's significant because the Bible makes it very clear this smoke rising up from the sacrifice was pleasing to God. You remember last week we talked about Noah's sacrifice? When he got out of the ark, he also gave a burnt offering. And in giving this burnt offering, it wasn't just 1 or 2 animals, it was many animals, and this rising up, this ascending up into heaven of the smoke. God sensed that, felt that, and he said, I will never again curse this earth. We talked again about the rhythm that God said that he would not disturb. And so the significance then is of being pleasing to God. It means this, that with the burning of the sacrifice, it was total, it was complete, it met the requirements, and God says, I am pleased with it. This particular instance, in giving the sacrifice, this is not the same as the smoke of the incense. We'll see then that there is the smoke of the incense, but this kind of pleasing to God, what is it? What's pleasing to God is the fact that a worshiper brought something of incredible, important value, not only to him, but to his family, and laid it on the altar as a complete and total sacrifice to Almighty God. You would say, we might say, why would they do that? I have to say, they point back to their hopeless situation in Egypt. No chance of being delivered from Egypt and the enslavement there. And God miraculously broke through and saved them from that. And gave them the hope and the promise of a new life in a new land, the promised land. And they're so glad for this opportunity to be able to give something of great value as a sacrifice and watch it go up in smoke as a pleasing aroma to God. What is it about the blood, too? The blood is only handled by the priests. Now, there's this blood of the animals. It's an important element of the sacrifice, but it's also not very magical. It's actually very messy. Think about it. I mean, they sprinkle blood on the side of the altar. Sometimes we'll see, they'll take blood and they'll put it on the horns of the altar, and they'll do it 7 times. Sometimes they'll go into the actual sanctuary there, and they'll pour blood on, put blood on the altar in there, and also blood on the curtain that separates the Holy of Holies. Well, they were 40 years, folks. They were 40 years in the wilderness. What do you think happens walking into that tabernacle? Nice, crisp, and clean for the first time. And the first time they walk in there, there's still the smellness of the new smell, like getting a new car or new furniture, and dedicating it to God by sprinkling blood on it. And yet, what they were doing is saying, this blood then is bringing this, it's showing the holiness, the separation, the fact that this is put apart. This blood reminded the offerer, the worshiper who offered it, that each of us deserves death because life is in the blood. And by sacrificing the blood, we're reminded we deserve death. But God intervenes, and this blood is offered in our place. It's the substitution. The fire, too, of the altar. You need to remember that fire in the altar was very important. It could never go out. Some say, we're not told specifically how the fire was started. Some commentators say that when the tabernacle was established and God inhabited it, there was fire that came out of the tabernacle, and some would say that that's when the fire was started in the altar. However, in starting that fire in the altar, it was to always be kept going and never to go out. The fire was a picture of the purifying of a holy God. Then we also have the leftovers. You've got the skin. The skin goes to the priest as a gift to the priest, probably for his services. The ashes are taken out to a clean place outside the camp. Nothing is left over from the burnt offering. Now, quickly, there's some things that I want you to, that we cannot see, but we need to get, okay? There's some things that are going on that we can't see. One of the things that it says there, it talks about laying on of hands on the animal. Why is that important? It's important that we should know the meaning of that word. Because the meaning of word isn't just kind of a laying on of hands. It was a pressing onto. And so it would be similar to going to the animal and actually holding your hands against that head, pressing your hands against it, because there was a transfer that was to take place. What the worshiper is saying is, that animal is taking my place. I am identifying